Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about 3 Eastern European states that managed to centralize and to set up absolute monarchies in the 17th and 18th centuries. Here are your video goals. Try to answer these questions by the time you're done with the video. Alright, so if you were to look at Eastern Europe around the year 1650, you would say that they were pretty far behind Western Europe in terms of development. They were poorer and less well organized and less technologically advanced than the Western European countries. And the 2 big reasons for this were, well, actually 3 big reasons for this were, one, the Holy Roman Empire had basically been involved in non-stop warfare from 1548 to 1648, and then had collapsed into total decentralization after 1648 due to the Peace of Westphalia. Russia was also behind because it was actually controlled by the Mongol Empire until the 1330s. And what this did to Russia is it prevented them from participating in European affairs until Europe was almost already in the Renaissance, while Russia was still more or less in the Middle Ages. And finally, they were also threatened by the Ottoman Empire, which was expanding rapidly during this time period and threatened these guys from the south. And there's a cool picture there of Ottoman cavalry more or less totally crushing a bunch of Eastern European knights. So this shows how Eastern Europe had fallen behind both its Western European counterparts, but also the Islamic Empire on its southern border. But from the years of 1600 to 1800, Eastern Europe makes a big comeback. And out of this kind of chaos that we see in Eastern Europe, in the wake of the 30 Years' War, is we see the emergence of 3 big, powerful, centralized, absolutist states: Prussia, Austria, and Russia. And in each of these, we're going to see the centralization of state power under an absolute ruler. The governments in these states purposefully copy the example set by France. And to do this, they have to control the feudal nobility, they set up bureaucratic governments, and they establish professional standing armies. To give you a sense of how much these countries change over these 200 years, we have a picture on the left of a Russian ruler named Ivan the Terrible. And so look at that guy, look at what he is, sort of message he is sending about the king or the ruler of Russia. And then on the right we have another Russian ruler, Catherine the Great, from the end of this time period. And so compare these two and maybe you'll get a sense of how monarchies changed over time in this period in Eastern Europe. Alright, so we're going to look first at Prussia, which emerges out of the ruins of the Holy Roman Empire after the 30 Years' War. Prussia begins as a tiny little German state consisting of really nothing more than this rather poor area called Brandenburg and this even poorer area known as the Duchy of Prussia. And so Prussia suffered greatly during the 30 Years' War, and when Frederick William, who's known as the Great Elector, comes to power towards the end of the 30 Years' War, he vows to make Prussia stronger so that it can defend itself and avoid future disasters. So he sets out to do 3 big things. He wants to make his state powerful by raising taxes, building up a professional army, and taming the nobles. So Frederick William achieves these 3 goals by boosting his tax income by taxing cities. So cities are growing in Germany just like in the rest of Europe, and so by taxing these cities he is able to get a bunch of money, and he uses this money to train a professional standing army. And this army, even though it's smaller than the French army, is very well disciplined and becomes one of the most powerful armies in Europe. Then he's able to tame the nobility of Prussia by basically offering them sweet jobs as officers in the army and as bureaucrats in the government. So rather than weakening the nobles, Frederick William is able to win over the loyalty of the nobles by giving them good positions in his new system. Frederick William the Great Elector is followed by King Frederick William I, who rules from 1713 to 1740. And Frederick William basically continues building up the strength of Prussia. And the two main things he does is he boosts the economy of Prussia by being tolerant to both Jews and a variety of Protestants. And these guys come in from other countries and bring their skills and their money with them. And he also continues to expand the army. And by the end of his reign, he's spending 70% of all Prussian taxes just on building up and training the army. Then, when Frederick William I's son takes over, Frederick II, also known as Frederick the Great, Frederick the Great has this huge army and a ton of money that his father has saved up. And Frederick the Great uses these resources to expand Prussia's borders. And so he's able to take land from his weaker neighbors and to make Prussia into a great power in Europe. He also, besides fighting wars, spreads a lot of French ideas and French learning into northern Germany. So Frederick the Great is copying France not only by centralizing power and building up the military, but also by spreading French ideas. And the other power that emerges out of the ruins of the Holy Roman Empire after the 30 Years' War is Austria. So basically, in the place of the Holy Roman Empire, we see two powerful German states emerge. Prussia in the north and Austria in the south. And so Catholic Austria was greatly weakened both by the Protestant Reformation and by the 30 Years' War, because the Catholic side lost that war. And it was also greatly threatened from the south by the Ottomans, and was increasingly threatened from the north by an expanding Prussia. And so Austria's goals over the next 200 years would be to strengthen its military, to take back land from the Ottomans, and to increase tax revenue from its various territories. And there's a map there. You can see the dark blue, the Ottomans, has by the 1550s expanded into a huge power and is pushing ever closer to Austria. And if you were to bet at that time period, you would probably have bet that the Ottomans would swallow up Austria and make it part of their empire. But that doesn't happen. The reason it doesn't happen is due partially to Austrian reforms. And so the first big reforms are undertaken by Prince Eugene of Savoy. And he reforms the Austrian military by copying the French model. So he gets rid of the old feudal military and forms a modern military in Austria. And then with this modern military, Austria is able to call together a Christian alliance against the Turks, and they're able to win back a lot of important eastern territory, especially the Kingdom of Hungary. And so by winning this extra territory, Austria is made a lot stronger. After this, two important rulers, Maria Theresa and her son Joseph II, are able to reform the Austrian government. They gain royal control of taxation, that is, they take the control of taxation away from local nobles. And they use this money to set up a bureaucracy, and this bureaucracy efficiently regulates the army and tax collection. So they take power away from the nobility, and they set up a governmental bureaucracy. This is a move that should seem pretty familiar to you guys by now. And so by 1800, Austria has stabilized and is once again a great power in Europe. And last, we've got Russia. And so let's talk about Russia before this time period. So as we said before, Russia was ruled by the Mongols until 1330. And what this means is that Russia is unable to participate in the European Middle Ages. So just as Europe is going out of the Middle Ages and entering into the Renaissance, Russia is more or less just breaking free from its Asian rulers and is still kind of stuck in the early Middle Ages. By 1600, Russia is still more or less medieval, and it's got a really, really poor peasant class ruled by a feudal military class, and almost no cities. The peasants in this area are legally owned by their noble landowners in a system known as serfdom. So they're more or less slaves that are stuck on little pieces of land. So Russia is huge, and it has more land in 1600 than the rest of Europe combined. But it's also really poor because it doesn't have any cities, and it's still kind of stuck in the Middle Ages. So this means that Russia has an incredible potential to grow and to become powerful, but that it's still pretty weak compared to Western Europe. And one reason that it's weak is it doesn't really have very much access to Western trade or to Western ideas or technology. Peter the Great sets out to change all of this. And so during Peter the Great's rule from 1682 to 1725, Russia westernizes. That is, it turns towards Europe and starts learning from Europe and becoming more European. Peter the Great basically sets out to copy Louis XIV's model. So in the reign of a single person, Russia goes from being medieval to more or less modern and on the same page as Western Europe. So Peter the Great kind of begins his whole westernization project by traveling around Europe and bringing back new products and new ideas. And he brings back big ideas like centralizing government, but he also brings back lots of little stuff like potatoes and dentistry and the idea of shaving your beards. And he actually forces a lot of Russian nobles to shave their beards so they'll look more European, weird as that might seem. So when Peter comes back and he starts basically forcing these Western ideas on people, there is a rebellion. And the nobles rise up kind of in the name of old school Russia. But Peter is able to put down the rebellion, and the nobles are forced to basically give up power to Peter after this rebellion. After this happens, Peter sets up a bureaucracy, and instead of getting rid of the nobles, basically puts the nobles into the bureaucracy. But he promotes them based on their skill rather than their birth. So Peter is able basically to take the nobles and force them to work with him in centralizing Russia. He sets up a new system of taxation, which he uses to support a big army. And then he uses this huge army to take a bunch of land from Sweden and set up a port city on the Baltic, which is named St. Petersburg, after Peter. And using this port city of St. Petersburg, he's able to connect up with Europe, and he's also able to take part in world trade. And so, as a result of the actions of all of these different rulers, Austria, Prussia, and Russia become really very powerful because they have bigger armies, more efficient governments, and they now have loyal nobles. And so by increasing their power, these three states are able to expand, and they're able to continue to take land from their less centralized, less modern neighbors. So this happens to Poland in 1790, where Austria, Russia, and Prussia basically all attack at the same time and split Poland up between them. So you can see in the top picture, there's Poland. It actually looks pretty big and powerful, but really Poland never modernizes. And so it's really easy for Prussia, Austria, and Russia to swallow Poland up, as you can see in the lower picture there. No more Poland. Austria and Russia are now strong enough to combine forces and to fight back against the Ottomans. And by 1800, Austria and Russia have both taken significant territories away from the Ottomans. And so basically the moral of the story is that centralization has paid off both for Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And all three of these guys have emerged as great powers in Eastern Europe, more or less on the same page as the rich and powerful countries of France and Spain and England in Western Europe. And we're done.